Before I begin today, I'd like to start with a short Bible study. The four Gospels are not historical accounts of Jesus' life and ministry, but theological accounts of who Jesus is and why he is the Messiah. Matthew, Mark, and Luke present many of the same stories and sayings of Jesus, using slightly different emphases to give us a picture of Jesus, the chosen one, the Messiah of God. And it's important to remember that Son of God and Messiah are titles that do not mean that Jesus is divine. The kings of Israel were God's sons, anointed ones, messiahs, and they were not divine. They were simply men. As for the Gospel of John, many scholars do not believe that John, the son of Zebedee, described in the New Testament as an illiterate fisherman, could have ever written the gospel which bears his name. Not only because it's written in Greek, but that it is written in the most sophisticated Greek that is found in the New Testament. It is in this fourth gospel, written 20 to 25 years after Matthew, Mark, and Luke, that makes Jesus divine, co-equal with God, as we read in the first chapter of the fourth gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Another interesting difference between the fourth gospel and Matthew, Mark, and Luke is the reason that Jesus does miracles and signs. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus does miracles because there's a need, a human need. People are hungry, they're sick, or they're blind. He does the miracle, but then strictly tells people, don't talk about it. He tells his opponents who demand a sign or a miracle from him that no sign will be given this evil and adulterous generation. He does this in Matthew 12 and 16, Mark 8, and Luke 11. By contrast, in the fourth gospel, Jesus does miracles precisely to show his divinity, to show his special relationship with God. People believe because of the signs and the miracles that Jesus does, and not because of his teaching, as in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. One of the fourth gospel themes that we read about today is the interplay between light and dark, and similarly between blindness and seeing. Today our story is about a man who gains his sight after being blind from birth, and the opponents of Jesus who have healthy eyes but still cannot see. In the name of our one, holy, true, and living God, amen. Stevie Wonder and Tiger Woods are in a bar. Tiger turns to Stevie Wonder and says, "How's the singing career going?" Stevie Wonder says, "Oh, not too bad. I still have millions of fans across the world. And so on all, I think it's pretty good. By the way, how's the golf?" Tiger replies, "I'm not winning as much as I used to, but I have some problems with my back." Stevie pipes in, "I always find that when my swing goes wrong, I need to stop playing for a while. And then the next time I play, it seems to be all right." "You play golf?" asks Tiger. Stevie says, "Yes, I've been playing for years." "But I thought you were blind. How can you play golf if you're blind?" Tiger asks, "Well, I get my caddy to stand in the middle of the fairway, and he calls to me, and I listen to the sound of his voice and play the balls toward him. Then where I go to where the ball lands, the caddy moves to the green and further down the fairway, and again, I play the ball toward his voice." "But how do you putt?" Tiger asks. "Well, I get my caddy to lean down in front of the hole and call to me with his head on the ground, and I just play the ball to the sound of his voice." Tiger says, "Well, what's your handicap?" "Well, I play off scratch," Stevie assures Tiger. Now, Tiger seems to be incredulous and asks Stevie, well, we must play around sometime. And Stevie Wonder replies, well, people don't take me seriously, so I only play for money. And I never play for less than $100,000 a hole. Tiger thinks it over and says, okay, I'm down with that. When would you like to play? I don't care, said Stevie Wonder. Any night next week is okay with me. I know a little bit about being born blind. Had I not been born in these modern times, I would be considered blind. My eyesight is so bad that the end of my nose is my focal length without my contacts in. I would be the blind beggar on the corner, walking with a white cane because my eyesight is so weak. Our senses are intimately connected to one another. If I don't wear my glasses or contacts, I don't hear, smell, or taste things well either. Now they say if you lose one of your senses, like your sight, then your other senses become more sensitive to help compensate for the loss. But that's probably over a matter of time and training. When I can see, I function better in all respects than when I don't see. But not all our inability to see has to do with the health of our eyes. We can be blindsided by life because we don't see possibilities that others see more clearly. We may not see the consequence of making poor choices in our lives, cheating on a test, not paying our taxes, lying to a spouse, betraying a friendship. We may not see the things that and how these damage our relationships. We may not see the corruption that they wreak on our souls. But like the portrait of Dorian Gray, the corruption is there, destroying the beauty that God bestowed on each and every one of us. Part of our blindness comes not from imperfect eyes or the fact that we don't always see what's coming down the road. Part of our blindness comes from our willful refusal to see the world as it is. We prefer the world of alternative facts to the truth that God has given us. We prefer to think of human beings as some autonomous, separate species rather than one of millions, inexorably linked to a planet which has given us life and which will also take our way of life if we continue to poison it. We think of certain human beings as being not human beings, less, depending on the color of your skin, your gender, your sexual orientation, rather than seeing human beings as a whole, as the apex of God's creation and a single whole human family. Rather than joining as one human family in a single community, we choose to dominate and oppress those we deem as less than ourselves. And we are willfully blind to the fact that we are one body, connected and interdependent, incomplete without each other. Like the lawyer in the parable of the Good Samaritan, we want God to place limits on who is in the human family, who qualifies as our neighbor. So Jesus tells a story to show that the only boundaries are the ones that we put there ourselves, because God doesn't have any. We are now in a time of crisis, facing a disease that has the prospect of taking more lives than I care to think about. Will we see each other with the eyes of God, or will we continue to divide ourselves between the sick and the healthy, the uninsured and the insured, the citizen and the foreigner, the young and the vital, or the old and the weak? In this time, in the valley of the shadow of death, with all its panic, cynicism, and despair, will we instead choose life? We can seize this opportunity to pull together and reach out, not touching each other, maintaining our social distance, but reaching out all in the same spirit of love, which has brought us into being, knows the number of hairs on our heads, and doesn't care, in fact, whether they're declining, and cherishes every one that shares the breath of life. To choose life comes with risks. To see the world through the eyes of God changes our entire perspective, changes our identity. We are no longer blind from birth, but witnesses to the light which gives us sight. And there will be those who are frightened that they will lose their carefully crafted power and position in society, that will seek to drive us out from their communities because we are no longer their kind of people, or the right kind of people. John Newton, do you remember his name? He had a particularly hard life. He lost his mother at a young age and found himself a sailor in the British Navy. Captured and forced to work under a slave ship captain, he was eventually rescued from that. Although his rescuer's ship almost didn't make it back to England. Struck by a violent storm, the ship nearly sank when John Newton cried out to God to save him and his shipmates. But even after being saved, Newton became a slave ship captain himself, taking several voyages to Africa to bring slaves to England. But after becoming violently ill on a slave voyage in 1754, Newton gave up his life as a slave trader and sailor and eventually became an Anglican priest, penning the lyrics to perhaps the most popular hymn ever known, Amazing Grace. In the fourth gospel, the battle between light and dark is there for us to see. We who see Jesus as the light of the world are called to be torches to carry his light into the world. If, as St. Paul writes, through Christ we are the adopted daughters and sons of the living God, let us now see not with our human eyes, but with the eyes of the one that we too can call Abba. In the fourth gospel too, Jesus prays for the unity of his followers. It is for us who see now to live into the unity that we share with God, Jesus, and each other. And I am more confident than ever that our little community of St. Thomas will do this now in this time of crisis. I once was lost, but now am found. 'Twas blind, but now